Welcome to the Mentored by Mark T channel, where we discuss things related to payments and the payments industry. In this video, we start putting together some of the building blocks from my previous videos in the Payment Card Processing 101 playlist. Let's talk about single message and dual message. There are a number of terms used to describe payment cards. Words like credit, debit, and prepaid identify the card product by the type of account it is attached to. Words like EMV, tap, token, and swipe define how the payment card interacts with the point-of-sale equipment. Phrases like single message and dual message identify the card transaction flow. Every transaction, whether purchase, refund, cash advance, cash withdrawal, funds transfer, each is either a single message transaction or a dual message transaction. Let's start our discussion with some basic definitions. Single message, dual message. This is a count of the number of distinct messages or records required to set up the transaction for settlement. Settlement is a separate action after the transaction to move funds. In part, this is because most funds movements are done in scheduled file transfers like ACH or EFT. Online. When a transaction message goes immediately from the merchant to the issuer, it is called online. Offline. This is when an authorization message occurs at the merchant location and is not relayed to the issuer. The first notification the issuer receives of the transaction is the clearing record. Watch my video on Where Does a Transaction Go for more complete definitions of the various transaction components. How do single message and dual message differ, and what are the implications of these differences? To best explain them, let's use two building blocks we covered in videos 1 and 3 of this playlist. These building blocks are called check and cash. As we mentioned in the last video, each new payment method builds on the strengths of its predecessors and attempts to mitigate the weaknesses of its predecessors. Now we will see this in action. Transaction flow. Checks. Checks are used so rarely now at a consumer level that a quick overview would be helpful. A check purchase has the following payment flow. Number 1, the customer writes out the check to the merchant for the amount of the transaction. The merchant may ask for an official identification document like a driver's license to compare the signature and name on the ID to that on the check. Number 2, remember, a check is not a payment. It is a promise to pay document. When the customer walks out of the store, the merchant has not yet completed the transaction. Number 3, at the end of the day, the merchant will take the funds from the day's earnings to the bank, including this check. The merchant's bank will send the check to the customer's bank as a request for the funds to be remitted. This is the beginning of the financial transaction. Number 4, the customer's bank validates the check and verifies the customer account has the funds to cover the check. If both of these are okay, the funds are sent to the merchant's bank. Number 5, the merchant's bank places the funds in the merchant's account. This whole process takes 5 to 10 business days, depending on a number of factors. Dual message. Dual message transactions were used by the earliest payment cards. Due to the lack of today's ubiquitous network access and electronic terminals, the cadence and flow of these early payment cards mimicked checks almost exactly. Paper credit card sales slips were used in place of checks at the point of sale. Payment cards replaced supplementary ID requirements. Manual imprinters, also known as knuckle busters and click-clack machines, and pens filled in the required information on the 3-part credit card sales slip, 1 copy for the cardholder, 1 copy for the merchant, and 1 copy couriered to the merchant's bank. Just like checks, credit card sales slips were a promise to pay document. They had to be couriered to the payment network. The payment network would create a net settlement position for the bank issuing the card. The funds remitted by the card issuing bank would be sent to the merchant's bank to be deposited in the merchant's bank account. This process would take 3 to 5 business days when it was paper-based. Those old days with the manual imprinters and credit card sales slips are gone. The embossed payment cards needed for imprinters have largely been replaced by unembossed payment cards. Incremental improvements have been made to the card payments infrastructure over its 50-plus year history, but the check template is still visible in the dual message payment transaction flow. Let's run through today's dual message transaction flow. See if you can identify the similarities. Number 1, the merchant or POS system enters the transaction amount into the payment terminal. The customer taps or dips the payment card using the payment terminal. The card and transaction information are sent in an authorization message to the issuer. The issuer validates the card holder, and that the account has the funds for the transaction. Number 2, if the issuer returns an approval to the authorization request, the merchant now has a guarantee of payment for the transaction. The approved authorization message is the first message in a dual message transaction. However, like a check, an approved authorization is not a payment. When the customer walks out of the store, the merchant has not yet completed the transaction. Number 3, at the end of the day, the merchant will run an end-of-day routine on the POS system. Among other things, the end-of-day routine will create a file of all approved transactions from the day. The transactions on this file are the second message of the dual message transaction. This clearing or settlement file is sent to the acquirer, who will send it through the payment network to the issuer. Number 4, the card issuer will receive the file, post the transaction to the cardholder account, and remit the funds so that they can be sent to the acquirer. Number 5, the acquirer forwards the funds to the merchant's bank account. This process takes 24 to 36 hours to complete, essentially 2 business days. Even after 50 years of technology and process improvements, dual message still mimics a check's transaction flow very closely. Single message. Single message transactions attempt to mimic a cash purchase. Even though cash has been around much longer than checks, single message payment transactions are a much more recent innovation than dual message. This is due to the technology dependency of single message transactions. Cash needs no transaction technology. Checks and dual message transactions predate today's technology and did run on paper documentation. However, single message transactions require online terminals and immediate responses from the card issuer. Here is how a single message transaction flows. Number 1, the merchant or POS system enters the transaction amount into the payment terminal. The customer taps or dips the payment card into the payment terminal. The card and transaction information are sent in a transaction message to the issuer. The issuer validates the cardholder, and that the account has the funds for the transaction. Number 2, if the issuer returns an approval to the transaction request, the merchant now has a guarantee of payment for the transaction. The issuer removes the funds from the cardholder account so that they can be sent to the acquirer in the settlement for that day. Though it will probably be another day before the merchant receives the funds, the data creation portion of the transaction is complete in this single message, and the funds have already started moving. Number 3, at the end of the day, the network runs reports to determine the net settlement position of each network participant, issuers and acquirers. Number 4, the card issuers remit the funds for their net settlement, and the acquirers receive the funds for their net settlement. And number 5, the acquirer forwards the funds to the merchant's bank account. As you can see, single message transactions come close to the immediacy of cash transactions. There are a few differences between cash and single message transactions, including: Number 1, on the downside, the merchant typically doesn't receive the actual funds until the next business day. Number 2, on the upside, with a single message card, the customer has access to all funds in their bank account, while a cash transaction only gives them access to the cash they have with them. And then number 3, payment card transactions provide a transaction record automatically, while cash transactions are unrecorded and anonymous. I will let you decide if this is an upside or a downside. Here is a summarized comparison table between dual and single message transaction flow. We'll cover the 4 stages of a transaction: at the POS, end-of-day processing, settlement cycle, and reconciliation. For dual message transaction, at the POS, the first message is an authorization request, the merchant requesting permission to submit a transaction. In the end-of-day processing, the second message is a clearing record that sends the transaction and its details from the merchant to the issuer. In the settlement cycle, the network creates net settlement positions for each of the connectors based on the clearing records submitted and processed. The issuers pay and the acquirers receive the funds based on their net settlement position. And in reconciliation, after settlement, each party reconciles their net settlement positions to their sent or received clearing records. In a single message transaction, at the POS, the online message is the transaction. An issuer approval completes the data creation portion of the financial transaction. In the end-of-day processing, the network runs end-of-day reports to collect all approved transactions in preparation for settlement. For the settlement cycle, the network creates net settlement positions for each of its connectors based on the daily approved transactions report. The issuers pay and the acquirers receive funds based on their net settlement position. And in reconciliation, after settlement, each party reconciles their net settlement position to their list of approved transactions. As you can see, single message and dual message seem very similar to each other. However, those slight differences affect where each of these works best and where some of these don't work at all. Single, dual, debit, credit. I have met many people who think single message is the same as debit and dual message is the same as credit. No, this is not true. Though each message type has often been associated with certain types of accounts, there is nothing in the message flow itself that limits a dual message transaction to credit or a single message transaction to debit products. A card attached to a line of credit account is called a credit card. Credit cards historically have always run on dual message for purchase transactions, also known as POS transactions. In part, this is because credit card products predate the current technology infrastructure needed for single message products. I don't know if I've ever seen single message used for credit card product, except for cash advances. In my experience, many credit card products do use single message for cash advances. The higher risk of fraud loss for cash advances and the fact that most ATM networks run on single message protocol makes single message a logical choice for ATM transactions, even on dual message products. The nature of a line of credit and the dual message transaction flow lend themselves well to delayed settlement transactions. This would include things like hotel stays, car rentals, and e-commerce purchases. I will talk more about this in a minute. A card attached to a demand deposit or checking account is called a debit card. For debit accounts, some markets have created two distinct products. Signature debit or check card products historically have used dual message protocol. This allowed them to flourish long before technology infrastructure existed to support single message debit. The downside of these signature cards was that the only validation of the cardholder was through signature on the credit card sales slip or receipt. Only the merchant could see and validate the signature. The issuer would never see the signature as they would with a check. This created a higher risk of fraud for the issuer. It could also be one of the contributing factors for the eventual invention of single message debit. Single message debit is also called PIN debit in some markets. This is because the architects of single message leveraged the online nature of these transactions to include a cardholder personal identification number, a PIN, in the transaction. The PIN was a number known by the cardholder but not present on the card. This gave the issuer the ability to validate the card and the cardholder at the time of the transaction request, something the industry calls dual-factor authentication. In the early 2000s, networks began to create debit products that supported both single and dual message. This combination of the check card and the PIN debit card functionality in one product was a natural evolution of the debit card product. One word of caution. Debit dual message cards can be used in almost all venues where credit cards can be used. This can cause problems for an unaware debit card cardholder. For example, a hotel or car rental agency's authorization secures funds for the full length of the booking plus the damage waiver. This is typically more than the final amount of the transaction. The card issuer will place a hold on these funds to prevent them from being spent elsewhere. I have heard many frustrated card holders who went on vacation using their debit card only to find out that almost all their funds were unavailable to them because the hotel and car rental holds on their account. Credit is a much better product for travel than debit. Cards attached to a pre-funded account that is not a demand deposit or checking account are called prepaid cards. Prepaid cards are defined as debit products in some markets. Other markets align them with credit products because of their unique risk profile. In each market, the prepaid card products will use the message format that aligns best with the definition in that particular market. This means they may use dual message, single message, or may be configured to handle both transaction flows. Risk and revenue. Dual message cards historically carry a higher risk than single message cards. This was due to the ability for dual message cards to be used offline in paper-based transactions, purchases over the phone, and mail order. As well, dual message allows a significant delay between authorization and clearing messages. This makes them useful in other transaction environments like delayed postings from hotels, car rentals, and e-commerce purchases. Since the actual transaction is in the clearing record, the merchant can secure an approved authorization and delay as long as 30 days before submitting the second message, the clearing record. This allows a hotel or car rental agency to secure the guarantee of payment at the beginning of the stay or rental and to wait until the end of the stay or rental period to submit one clearing record for all expenses incurred by the customer. E-commerce merchants also leverage this unique dual message characteristic by getting approval from the issuer at the time of purchase for the total purchase amount, but then submitting one or more clearing records as the products ship. Single message products include PIN, which, as we mentioned earlier, is also known as dual factor authentication. Most single message products can handle the delay of an automated fuel to pump transaction at a gas station, which can be up to 15 minutes. However, they cannot handle the multi-day delays of hotels, car rental agencies, or e-commerce merchants. This is because in single message, the online message is the transaction. All single message transactions must be completed on the processing day they start on. As well, single message products cannot be used for offline, for phone or mail order purchases. This has given single message card products a significantly lower risk profile than dual message card products. The amount of issuer risk is a component of the interchange rates for a card product. Dual message card products that are tied to lines of credit have historically had higher interchange rates than single message products tied to deposit accounts. Though this is not a factor for a cardholder, it is a significant factor for merchants and issuers. So let's talk about Ubiquity at point of sale. Over the past 3 decades, I've watched the pendulum swing between single and dual message. Each has its champions and each has its detractors. Currently, the pendulum has swung hard towards dual message Ubiquity. In most markets, almost all POS terminals accept dual message cards. International networks strongly promote dual message products as they offer the most flexibility, like face-to-face, offline, e-commerce, delayed authorization transactions, and higher revenue for card issuers. Single message POS products tend to be used by regional or national debit networks. International single message POS acceptance is spotty at best. These cards do work well in daily face-to-face transactions. They have a lower risk factor than dual message card products. For cash or debit preferring demographics, the single message debit card is a welcome product. Transactions post to the cardholder account immediately, making the account balance management much easier for the cardholder. In my country of Canada, the national single message debit network, Interac, has also leveraged its infrastructure to build a compelling person-to-person funds transfer product and an identity validation product. Both are things dual message networks struggle to accomplish. At ATM, almost all ATM networks worldwide are single message. The few markets that use dual message ATM acquiring bridge those messages to single message for cards from other countries. As I mentioned previously, any dual message card product with ATM access will have single message capability for ATM access. So where does all this information lead us? Hopefully you have a better understanding of the similarities and differences between single and dual message. Depending on your company's role in the payments industry, issuer, acquirer, merchant, your preference will be guided by things like cost and revenue. A merchant may prefer a single message card as a lower cost, while an issuer may prefer a dual message card for revenue. POS flexibility. Certain merchants, issuers, and cardholders will likely prefer dual message card as it allows delayed clearing and non-face-to-face transactions. Know your market. The caveat to the previous point is that too much flexibility on a debit card can cause frustration for a cardholder. Know your customers and how to shape your products or acceptance options to best serve them. If you are a merchant looking to build the best payment card acceptance strategy, or an issuer trying to build the best payment products for your clients, talk to me or another experienced payments consultant to help you navigate the nuances of this topic, as it can make or break your success. We have just covered the surface of this amazing topic in this video. There are many nuances and details well beyond the scope of this video that are important to your acceptance or issuing solutions. If you found this video helpful, please click the like button and subscribe to this channel. If you have more questions about payments industry, leave a message in the comments below. You can also contact me through my website, mentoredbymarkt.com, or via email, markt@mentoredbymarkt.com.